Welcome back to the channel. Today, I and the lovely Julia, who happens to be filming at the moment, have come up to, I think we're near Stevenage actually, in Hertfordshire, at the Groundswell Regenerative Agricultural Show. It's a festival, I think it actually is. It's a massive event with all sorts of stuff, and we're here to find out as much as we can about the whole regenerative movement and whether people are farming, growing, producing, caring for the soil in the right way, the way that we think is important. So do join me as we venture around and see what it's all about. Well, look at these amazing, wonderful, wonderful creatures here, and they've permitted me to come into the sheep pen. And I'm here with the North Herts farmers, and there's a very nice gentleman. Can I ask your name?
I'm James Williams. I'm the General Manager of North Herts Farmers.
Excellent. They've got some interesting names. Could you tell me what they're
They
called?
have. So Clement is a pedigree Cotswold. So he was the prize winner from a couple of years ago from it's the best Cotswold sheep in the UK 2 or 3 years ago. And Francois is a French dairy cross, and he's our sort of local moron, I think is probably the technical variety. So he basically came from a much. My wife's a vet, so we were given him as a lamb who he wasn't very well. He lived on a drip in our kitchen for about 3 weeks.
Oh,
so,
bless.
But yeah, we have a small flock of sheep, mostly Cotswolds.
Freshly shorn, I see.
Yes, last weekend. Yeah, on the Herts Beds border. So, and we have we have all our own lamb, and we supply in some local sort of places as well.
And I mean, one of the things that we're absolutely desperately trying to promote in the channel is getting people to understand that real food, where it comes from, what it is, get off the highly processed stuff.
Definitely.
And these sort of things. And just remind people really where we've come from, rather than this big corporate move to try and race to the bottom, I suppose.
There's a race to the bottom. I think there's also a race to the finish as well. So in terms of finishing food the quickest we can, which I mean, in some ways, actually, the way that a lot of the carbon footprinting is done now is counterproductive to the way that food quality should be, because actually the quicker you can finish various stock, it actually kind of is a positive thing in terms of carbon footprinting, because it apportions less of a carbon per kilo of meat effectively. So it doesn't put the emphasis on slow grown meat, which ultimately is more nutrient dense, and you only get that nutrient density from actually feeding natural, mostly grass, to be honest with you.
And more respect to the animals.
Yeah, they're much nicer life. These two are usually in a field, on a hill, living their best sheep life.
Living the dream.
Yeah, as I say, my wife's a vet, so animal welfare is a huge thing for us.
Yes.
We have mostly for our own meat, and we have a really, because we're not commercial as such, we have our own sort of metrics, and that's that we want our animals to have the best life that they possibly can, to eat the most naturally they possibly can, and that's what's important to us.
Tree shelters. You know when you're out walking in the countryside and you see all these lovely new planted trees, or perhaps the trees have all died, or the trees have grown up and these plastic tree shelters are just strewn all over the ground. Because they're made of plastic, they don't seem to disappear. We've just stumbled across Gary here from Next Gen Tree Shelters, and what a terrific idea you've got. Hello, Gary.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, because yours are biodegradable, for one thing.
Yes.
But what impressed me more is they're made from British wool.
Well, I lived in Brecon Beacons for 10 years, and I could see the mountains of wool every year piling up in the yards, and looked at how wool could be used to replace the use in plastic tree shelters. So it's it's a fantastic product that is underutilized. That is getting more attention now in different products, but we use it for the biodegradable trigger within the tree shelters. Because once you take the lannin, the pea, the poo and the brambles out of the wool, you've got an amazing biodegradable product. Once exposed to the element, UV, water, the environment, it will degrade within about a year.
Right.
Okay. So that is the scaffolding, if you like, to our tree shelter.
Yes.
We had to protect the wool for 5 years because a tree shelter needs to last a minimum 5 years. So we've designed a natural polyol that will break down through fungi and algae. They will break down and eat the fat within the resin, and you will find that after 5 to 10 years, it will just disintegrate and dissolve into the ground.
They're not a breed, they're called Exlana, but they're not a breed.
We found some more sheep, only these sheep are slightly different from the previous sheep, which were freshly shorn. These sheep shed their own, well, they molt basically, they shed their own fleece.
They do?
I'm with Dan from, how do you pronounce this?
Exlana.
Exlana. Is that the name of the company or the name of the sheep?
It's the name of both.
Both.
It's Latin for woolless.
Ah, Latin for woolless. So we've just had this amazing conversation. Dan is a farmer and he runs his animals all over the place in Herefordshire.
In Herefordshire and Wiltshire.
And Wiltshire.
Yes, we have 1,200 breeding ewes and they produce about 3,000 lambs.
Fantastic. But the thing that really inspired me was the story about how you don't need to have these sheep shorn. So nobody comes in and every however often they do it, take the wool off. The wool naturally molts, and it just goes onto the ground and is biodiversible and adds nutrients to the soil. Have I got the gist of that?
Yes, correct,
Yeah.
correct. Traditional sheep would be shorn once or twice a year,
Right.
Depending on how woolly they are. The benefit of these sheep is that they don't need shearing at all. They will naturally molt their fleece in the spring when the day length increases, and that wool just molts out onto the ground and is either used by birds for nests or it biodegrades back into the ground, adding to the fertility of the soil. In the autumn, when the day length starts reducing, they stop shedding their wool.
Right.
And the wool therefore builds up on them to a level that they're happy to keep them warm in the winter.
Yes.
And then after Christmas in the springtime, as soon as it starts to warm up, the day length increases, the wool starts growing again and pushes out what was left from the previous year.
Because that must be really good for the sheep themselves. Because if you have sheep and you just get them all shorn and then the next day it's a frost,
Yep.
it's a bit of a shock for the
exactly.
sheep, isn't it? Whereas they're just doing it as and when nature dictates.
As and when nature intends, as it suits them. It means that we don't have to use any fly control products on our sheep,
Right.
Because the wool isn't there to attract the flies. Fly control products are a necessary evil when it comes to woolly sheep because they stop the sheep being eaten by maggots, but they also damage invertebrates, dung beetles, etc., which we don't have to use on these sheep. So all those bugs are there to help break the wool down into the soil.
Yes, and your sheep here have got long tails.
They have. A sheep unfortunately can't wipe its bum.
No.
So a woolly sheep has to have its tail chopped off to stop the build-up of muck. These sheep don't require that because they don't have the wool to build the muck up.
Yes. Grassroots farming. Now we're all about grassroots, getting people to understand where their food comes from and the connection with farms. And I've just met up with James, this is your organisation,
That's right, yes.
Grassroots Farming. You're a farmer?
Yes.
Fantastic. You've just told me something which stopped me in my tracks, which I think is one of those things that most people take for granted, is the thought of the farmer who knows what he's doing in terms of growing basically food and how nutritious and delicious and all of those. But you just said something rather astonishing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a huge disconnect between farming and food. I think the two industries have been very disconnected. I think say this as a farmer, a large scale farmer, that we were producing a commodity. You know,
Right.
our disconnect with beef or grain, and we were putting it and selling it to supermarkets, and we never get any feedback. But then about 6 years ago, I started doing things differently. I got into regenerative farming and realising there's a different way of doing things. So we started selling direct, and now we've got a contract with Honest Burgers that our farmers get direct feedback. And it's amazing now that we can take our farmers into restaurants, and the feel-good factor of them showing their family the fruits of what they produce, and also we can get the restaurants and the chefs back on farm, and we're reconnecting it and shortening supply chain and making it like it should be, really.
And of course, the product that they're creating, then they're aware that they're making burgers or whatever the food is in those restaurants, rather than just that one commodity. As you said before we were filming, the cattle go out the door and that's the last they see of it.
Yeah, and you know, also what we're trying to prove as well, we're trying to benefit the environment as well, because we do baseline studies on biodiversity, we show improvements in soil health, bird counts, worm counts, and we're just bringing the industry back together like it used to be.
Yes.
You know, a more localised food supply.
Yes. Oh, that, I mean, and that to us, in what we're trying to say to people, is just music to our ears,
Yeah.
because you see so many of these very large farms who do monoculture and one thing, and it is the fact that they're not connected to where it goes or how to enjoy it themselves.
Yeah,
You know, if you've got farmers in restaurants eating their own beef going, wow, this is
Yeah.
cooked really well,
Yeah.
and it's our food or our neighbour's food, it's brilliant.
Yeah, and I think it's been the easy option to supply supermarkets.
Yes.
And it's faceless. So when our produce goes off, we wouldn't know where it goes,
Yes.
who's eating it, what the feedback is, and this brings a bit of a joy back to farming.
Well, it's been really, really interesting coming here. I've not been to this show before, Groundswell. We wasn't actually quite sure whether it was Groundswell or Groundswell, and maybe there are two different interpretations of that. It's clearly a farming show, agriculture. There's a lot of big agricultural stuff. There's some big tractors, big diggers, drillers, all that sort of stuff that you would expect, I suppose. The thing that's fascinated me is the regeneration tag, and I'm really trying to understand what that really means in terms of farming in this country. I was rather hoping to see, I think, maybe more initiatives for people who are now awake and thinking about growing their own small scale stuff, small holdings, farmsteads, that sort of stuff. Seems to be a lot of the corporate message. We've seen in the magazine Farming Weekly that you get when you come in the door in a little sort of goodie bag thing, this transition to net zero. To me, that is a bit of a sad thing, that everybody has bought in to this government push to net zero, the whole belief that climate change, man-made climate change, is actually a thing. Now, you and I, of course, know that this is the biggest myth, and so much is being done in the name of that, which is detrimental to not only the planet but to us humans. So I was rather surprised, because I thought perhaps the farming community were pushing back against that they wanted to very much stand on their own feet and say, actually, we are important, farmers are not the problem. But it does seem that so many of the farmers themselves are being forced into that direction of going into carbon offsetting and all of that. So much of the pamphlets and the stands talk about carbon and carbon offset, that this message is really being hammered home. And although we actually spoke to a few independent farmers who were just roaming around, they saw me, recognized me for the channel and said, no, we're definitely awake and we don't go with this net zero. It does seem that is a bit of a problem. So I don't know what we do about that, because that's really going to hold us back. There are these methods now apparently where you take the cow dung, you put it through a whole osmosis of processing, and then you can turn it into some biofuel so that you can drive your tractor and say it's carbon free. And it just seems to me as take the cattle dung and just spread it on the land. to cut out the middle bit of processing it. So looking around in the festival, because it's a festival, isn't it? We're looking for good news stories, and of course there's loads of those. But this is a fascinating story that you've got here. I'm with Leona from Golden Hooves, and this beautiful orange setup here, of course, catches the eye. And the Golden Hooves are hooves to dairy cows?
Yeah, that's right. It's about celebrating the good work that dairy farming can do, using the hooves to sequester carbon back into the land, using traditional farming methods.
And what's really interesting is you've got this portable, sort of a glorified vending machine, which is dispensing milk to all and sundry. And it's the sort of thing that if a small farm who can't afford a farm shop or can't get planning permission and all those sort of issues, they can put this on their land close to the community and people can come and get milk.
Yeah.
They can. You've also got a refrigerated, what would you call it, vending area for local produce.
Local produce, meats, cheese, eggs, bread. You can put anything you want in there, really. I think we just try to encourage people to celebrate what they have going on locally, and obviously try and keep whatever they put in there as sustainable as we possibly can, because that's really important, that message.
And I think it's absolutely fantastic, because then you can encourage people to come along. The farmer can carry on doing his work, hasn't necessarily got to employ somebody else, which would be draining his income, and people can just, like in the old way of a vending machine where you can get fizzy drinks and chocolate, you can keep people healthy.
You can keep people healthy. The farmer gets the most return for his money. Everybody feels like they've had a bit of a trip out. It's a bit of an event as well at the same time. And you can also get some great produce. So at the end of the day, everybody wins, and it brings the community closer to the farmer. That brings back that connection, which I think has been lost, and is the kind of thing we're trying to celebrate while we're here today.
As you know, we're looking here on the site for those initiatives which are really going to help farmers, but not just farmers, the buying public as well. I've met up with Pete, an Australian, who is running an outfit called Ubi, which does sound very Australian, but I gather it has a completely different name.
Well, Ubi stands for out of our own backyards.
Out of our own backyard.
Which is all about local food, producing it in our own local area.
And that is fantastic, and we want to see more of that, because supermarkets have taken away that sort of old-fashioned local seasonal element, and it's great to see that coming back. Now you're running not the actual veg box scheme yourself, but the software, is that right, so that farmers can do this easily?
Exactly. So we give the farmers the software and the online platform for them to be able to set up their own home deliveries to their own local community, so they can sell direct to their local community, which means that the farmer gets a lot more of the retail pound. In fact, they get all of the retail pound.
Yes.
And the customer is not paying for the usual supply chain costs that they would pay for in the supermarket.
Yeah, and so. How does it work if you've got a farmer who's only got a limited amount of stock or what he grows, and the customers clearly would say, well, I'll have a veg box, but I would like a little bit more than what you do?
So that is very common, and most of the farms that are selling on Ubi also buy in from neighbouring farms. So they'll produce their own range of products, their market garden, but then they might buy eggs from a local farmer, and I'll buy bread from the local baker, and they'll effectively aggregate all the food that's available from that local area onto one place where customers are going to go buy and either have it delivered to their door, or they can go and pick it up from a collection point. But the farmer is now the one who you are dealing with, as opposed to a supermarket.
Yeah, and this is one step closer to the public and more local than perhaps some of those national veg boxes that people know about, and the names are very familiar to them. So that they're actually buying locally and seasonally as well. And I guess if they know the farms, they know the kind of produce that's coming out of it.
Exactly. And that's a really big part of it, is just the knowledge of who you're buying your food from, and that you'll quite likely know the farmer or will bump into them in the street down on the high street. So there's a level of intimacy there that just can't be matched.
It's the next day. We've camped overnight and the rain came over, but that's not stopping us going and investigating and looking for those innovative ideas that we can bring more food to the consumer. And I've come over to Aeroponics for Better Food, the Aponic International site, meeting up with Jason. Hello, Jason.
Hello, Richard.
You're doing something very innovative and very different to anybody else here.
Yes, there's a lot of farmers come up and say, we're not sure about this, what is it? But we've quickly explained that actually it's a really efficient way to make profit on the farm and make much, much better food.
So aeroponics, you're growing vertically as opposed to laterally.
Yeah, well, that turns acreage into volume, so
Right.
It's using the space much more efficiently. And with the vertical, when you're spraying from the top, you've got gravity on your side, so you're not using as much power.
So here's a naive question then. There you are with your watering can or your hose pipe and you're trying to get the water up. You're not doing that, are you? You've got an irrigation system built in.
Exactly, it's a little 12-volt pump, and it sprays for 10 seconds every 20 minutes. So it's literally using 12 minutes of 12-volt power a day. So it's not using very much power at all, which means we can drop it off-grid anywhere on the planet, and it will run on a solar panel, a car battery, and a bucket of water a week.
Blimey, gosh, that's so innovative. And okay, now we think of plants having to be in the ground to get all the nutrients and vitamins and minerals and all of those. If you're growing them up in the air and you're only spraying them, how do they get the necessary minerals that they will need to be useful to us?
So the nutrient is mixed in with the water, and we have your macronutrients, your micronutrients, but we also put a lot of trace elements in. So that gives you basically the perfect soil mix, and that makes it the plant much more efficient in its own well-being.
Right.
But being an aeroponic system, you're actually got the roots out in the open and you're spraying them, so they're not in soil.
Okay.
And that lets lots more oxygen get to the roots, so the plant forms its oils and sugars much more efficiently. And those are the building blocks, so you're growing faster, you've got bigger yields, but that also gives it amazing flavour and an incredible nutrient load.
So what sort of plants can you grow? What would be your typical range?
It really depends on where it is and how the market goes. But
Right.
the vertical system, we can do anything from herbs right up to big chili plants, big chili bushes.
Oh, okay.
And in a system over here, we've got the flat system which sprays from underneath. And there you can do crops like cotton, you can do raspberries, you can do tea, tobacco, all sorts of other things.
Now we're outside exposed. Is that how it would be, or would you put it in an environment of its own?
So ideally you put it in a controlled environment,
Yeah.
which
That was the word I was searching for, controlled environment.
So we basically build that controlled environment. We've got
Yes.
this big insulated Lego set.
Oh, okay.
So we can build a 100 square metre block in about 40 minutes.
Wow.
And then we put the farm inside it, and you've got a known value right the way through, and you're protecting the crop, so you're protecting from a lot of disease and all sorts of other
Yes.
things, but it means you can control everything in there, so you've got basically conditions where it's in eternal spring, so you're cropping 365 days a year.
Right.
And for farmers that means you're employing full-time people rather than seasonal labour,
Yes.
and you're delivering locally, and you're creating a business which is not only sustainable in environmental terms, but it's a sustainable business.
Well, that's my trip, and the lovely Julia holding the camera dutifully, our trip to Groundswell 2023. A very interesting state of affairs, I think. Not been to an agricultural show like this. One of the things that I was hoping that Julia and I could actually get whilst we was here is some farm food, to actually try and taste some genuine organic or near organic or beyond organic farm food and see the sort of range that they're doing. There was none of that. Lots of big tractors, lots of seed sellers, lots of insurance sellers, banks, equipment and various advisory bodies and things like that. We found, as you saw, some amazing people who are actually looking for stuff that is, I think, for smaller people, new people coming into the farming industry, people who really care about the land and the food. And then there's clearly this net zero nonsense which the government are pushing towards farmers, and I feel a lot of farmers are trapped. They're having to do that to either get their subsidies or to keep their land or whatever, to keep going, which is a bit of a shame. But a fascinating insight. So many things we could have looked at and talked about. Of course, there's never enough time, but I hope that you got something out of this. We hope to be out and about at more different events like this and report about the state of all sorts of things. So I'll be back, no doubt, in the studio doing some comments and, of course, interviewing some fantastic people. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to follow, like and subscribe, all those things, and see you next time. Bye bye for now.